What do you do when you've got that offer in and the appraisal falls short? Stay with me and we'll give you your options.
You better get fired up.
Guys, happy Monday. Good to see you. I appreciate you joining me. Today, we're going to talk about appraisals, and I'm going to start by talking about the four different options that you have when an appraisal falls short, right? And I'll explain what an appraisal is and what that means falling short. And then I want to look at it both from the buyer standpoint and from the seller standpoint, right? So first of all, an appraisal is a third-party review, and it's hired by your lender for that appraiser to come out and say, hey, what's the property worth? And they've got certain stipulations that they have to follow depending upon the rules of the lender that they're working with, right? So some of those rules might be it's got to be in the particular community. I'm in Bedford Park. Maybe it has to be in Bedford Park. Maybe it's got to be within a mile or 2 miles or whatever it is. Or maybe it's got to be plus or minus 5%, 10% on the square footage. There are specific rules they have to follow in order to be able to appraise your property, right? And they're looking at comparable sales. And they're not looking at actives, right? A lot of sellers are like, hey, my buddy Bob is selling for 800, so my home's got to be worth 800. Meanwhile, Bob's home is worth 500 and he's overpriced by 300, right? So active asking prices do not matter. It's sale prices that matter. There's also certain dates that you'll go back, right? You can't go back looking 3 years or anything like that, nor would you probably want to. But so there's certain aspects that an appraiser has to follow. I share this because sellers often want to list their home higher, right? And especially when you get into higher price points, I'm talking like $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 and higher. They'll want to list, say, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 higher than some of the comps we can find. And the appraisal becomes or could become a challenge, right? So that's what an appraiser is. Why is an appraisal ordered? It's ordered because the lender says, hey, we've got a salesperson, the lender, at the front of this loan, and they, of course, want to get the thing sold. And you got a realtor involved, and of course, they want to get it sold. And you got a seller and a buyer, and of course, those two want to get it sold, right? But we're the lender, and we're here for business purposes. We want to make sure that all our calculations on the risk and everything else makes sense. So let's get a third-party appraiser in here to look at the property and tell us from their professional point of view. They make the same amount whether they bring them a high number or a low number, right? I'm commission-based, the lender's commission-based. The buyer and seller, they're compensated by emotions. One of them gets to sell a home and make money. One of them gets to live there, right? So everybody's got something to win or lose in the deal other than the appraiser. He's paid a flat fee. They go out there and they just say, this is what it's worth, like it or not like it. They don't care, right? So it's really helpful for the lender. It's protection, almost insurance for that lender. So what's the purpose of this video? We're talking about appraisals that fall short. So let's say you've got a $500,000 home and the seller's saying, hey, I want 500 grand. The buyer's saying, oh my gosh, I love this house. Absolutely, I'll pay you 500 grand. And now 2-3 weeks later, the appraisal comes in and it's at 480, right? It's not going to meet the price that you offered to pay. What happens? Well, number one, the lender will not give a loan based on $500,000 in that situation. They're going to give a loan based on 480. So if you're a 10% down buyer and you were putting down 50 grand and you were going to fund 450, now they're going to base that 90-10 off of 480 because that's the appraised amount. So now they would expect you to bring $48,000 to the table. Now I got to do some tough math. And 432 maybe probably is going to be financed, right? So I don't think that math is right. But anyway, you get my point. So now you're saying, okay, well, what happens to the other $20,000? You've got four options. The first option is the seller drops their price. They say, hey, we were asking 500. Now we're going to drop it to 480. Bing, bang, boom, no problems. Everybody moves forward and we're good to go, right? The second option is the buyer says, I'm going to come up with the difference in cash. So yes, now I've still got to come up with my 10% down or whatever it is. So that's $48,000 based on a $480,000 sales price. But I need another 20 grand plus my closing costs in order to close on this property. Does a buyer like it? Heck no, but some sellers won't drop their price. And that's what a buyer has to do, or at least wants to do, if they love the property enough, right? The third option, and this is the one I've probably seen 95% of the time, is some variation of those two things, right? So if it's $20,000 difference, Maybe the seller comes down 10 and the buyer comes up with 10 in cash. Maybe it's 15 and 5 or 5 and 15 or 7 and 13 or whatever. It doesn't matter. As long as the two add up to the $20,000 gap, you're good to go, right? And then the fourth option is the buyer walks and they get their escrow deposit back. Asterisk. What's the asterisk? The asterisk is you've got to have a contingency in there. You've either got to have a financing contingency and or an appraisal contingency, right? If you've got one or both of those two things, you're good to go. So let's look at this from both a buyer standpoint and a seller's standpoint, right? What can you use to your leverage and where can you get hurt on this? So as a buyer, you really want to be aware of the fact that when you put in a really strong offer because you really love the property or there's multiple offers, or, we're not seeing this so much now, but maybe 3-4 years ago when the market was ridiculously hot, people were just coming in high. They were coming in 20, 30, 40, $50,000 high, sometimes more, and the properties weren't appraising. I had a lot of appraisal issues during that time, and I haven't had an appraisal issue in probably over a year now, right? I'm just not having that problem because the market's very steady. So from the buyer's standpoint, when you're in one of those situations, right, multiple offers, an improving market, a significantly improving market, or you just love the home and you want to come in strong so you don't lose it, you've got to know that you risk the appraisal falling short. Now, if you are okay with that and you're like, hey, I can make up the cash difference, right? So let's go back to that scenario. It's a $500,000 asking price and you're coming in at 500 and it only appraises at 480. Mentally, you've got to say, do I have an extra $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 if it falls short? If I do, cool. That's plan B. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it happens, I'm good to go, right? Or you've got to be willing to walk, right? If you can negotiate with the seller and get them to come all or some of the way down, and then you pony up any difference. If there is a difference, great. But if you can't, you've got to be willing to walk. And I really want you just to think about that, right? As long as you're aware of that, I'm not saying you like it or you're going to be in any better position, but at least mentally you're going to be in a better position because you know it's possible, right? And the third thing, if you're on a very strict timeline, you cannot risk it and you cannot pony up more cash, then I probably would not come in on a property that has several offers and you're coming over $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 if your agent is telling you this might not appraise. I can't find a lot of comps to support this. I just want you to be aware. If timeline is an issue, that might not be the greatest situation for you, right? The other option is people who are higher in down payment. For example, on a $500,000, thank God I use that. It's an easy one to figure math on. And you're putting 50 grand down. You could theoretically shift to an FHA 3.5% down or a conventional 3 to 5% down. And let's just say you go to a conventional 5% down. That's a $25,000 difference in what you need for down payment. So now if it falls $20,000 short, you can go from 10% down to 5% down, get that 25 grand back, use 20 of it to fund the difference in cash, right? So there you've got another option. However, if you're coming in with an FHA 3.5% down or a conventional at whatever the minimum for that particular product you're using is, that is not going to be an option for you, right? Because you're already at the lowest amount down that you would need. So there are some options for all that as buyers, okay? As a seller, you need to be aware, and the higher your price point, the more this is true. I will say I've had 13 appraisals fall short since I've been here in Florida, which next month will be 5 years. I can't believe it's been 5 years. And I've had 13 fall short, right? One of them was under $500,000. The other 12 were all above $500,000. So that doesn't mean that properties below $500,000 always appraised. They don't. But there's so many more comps, right? If I show you any $425,000 home, you're going to have seen that home a million times because your friends have that home. Maybe you have that home. That is the median price here in Port St. Lucie. So that price point is going to have a ton of comps just like it. But if I show you $1 million home in Port St. Lucie, I mean, there's only, I don't even know what it was, 10, 20, 30 of them that sold last year in Port St. Lucie for 7 figures. There's just not a lot of them. So if you've got one of those and you're trying to sell it, it's going to be more challenging to sell, right? And when I say more challenging to sell, I don't just mean that the buyer pool is smaller and it's going to take longer. I also mean that the comps that you're going to find are going to be harder to find, because $1 million home is usually going to be very unique, right? I've seen $1 million homes that have indoor racquetball courts, indoor theaters. They've got 3 stories, which is something you rarely see here in Port St. Lucie. They've got putting greens out back. They've got maybe a lazy river out, but they got all kinds of crazy stuff that isn't as easy to find comparable sales for, right? There's another way to appraise that out, but it's tough to find comps for that. I've seen really great builders, higher end builders, some of the best builders in the area, and they build higher end properties. There's just not a lot of comps for them. So they have a tough time sometimes finding buyers that can get the appraisal to come through where they can successfully close. So one solution to that is only look for cash buyers. Now, the challenge with a cash buyer is, number one, I'm going to look this up here. I'm going to look it up right now. In fact, let's see if I can share screen, because this is a question that pops up all the time, and I want to show people what the actual answer is. And the question that we're about to answer is, what percentage of homes closed in Port St. Lucie are selling cash? I think a lot of people think it's 30-40%. And I know it's Florida, and I know we got a bunch of retirees coming down, and they got their cash, and they got, they just sold their home in New York or California, whatever it is. But I think the number that you're going to find is going to be lower than what you may think it is. So I'm going to go back to closed, and we'll just look back to the beginning of the year, 1/1/2024. And let's look at single family homes only. So we got single family homes. So we got 1,600. I'm going to write this down. 1,604 sales during that time. Okay. Now what I'm going to come down and do is I'm going to go, how many were, oh, that's not what I want. That is not what I want. Okay, let's go. I got to think of how I look this up. Okay, let's look up one of my listings. Oh my gosh, I can't think. Okay, 1908. Is it Southeast Water Willow? No. Southwest Water Willow? No. Let's just try Water Willow. No. Now you're seeing the challenge of becoming a, here we go, Northwest Water Willow. So 1908 Northwest Water Willow. Here it is. And at the bottom, it should say how it sold. Terms of sale, that's what we're looking for. So let's come back here to quick search and Port St. Lucie. And again, we're going sold, and we're going back to the first of the year, and we're looking at single family homes only. And what do we got? It should be 1604. It's 1604. Okay, so now we want to go add a field. Terms of sale right here. And we're going to hit cash. And the answer is 412. Honestly, that's higher than it used to be. Considerably higher. It's 26%. So think now, if you are saying, hey, I don't know if my home is going to appraise because you're telling me, Joe, it's worth 700. I want to list it at 775. Let's get a cash buyer. Cool. Now for every 100 buyers that we had, we just got rid of 74, 75 of them, and we're down to 25, 26 buyers, right? And cash buyers will typically say, whether it's true or not, it's their perception, I'm cash. Cash is king. We can come in low and we can negotiate because my offer is going to be better. It's cash. Now, at the end of the day, when it closes, it's all cash, right? It doesn't matter if it's got a loan or it's cash or whatever. It's all cash in your account. So what's the difference, right? What it does is get rid of some contingencies, one of which is the financing contingency and or the appraisal contingency. But again, they know that. So it's a little bit more challenging. So just as a seller, realize when you've got a higher priced home, again, I'd say maybe starting at that $600,000 price point, if you want a cash buyer, you're severely limiting the amount of people who can purchase your home. And if you don't, you've really got to be priced right. Or even if you get that buyer and you're so excited, you've got your closing date and you've got the bill or the movers lined up and you've got everything all done on the new place and you're excited to get there. And then a week before closing, you're going to find out that your appraisal came in short. And it is a stressful situation because now you're in a bind. You want to move, right? And this is where the emotions kick in and people start making bad decisions, right? And so are you going to give up cash, 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 so you can continue to move forward and not have to deal with the headache of stopping and starting over? Or are you going to hold fast, not negotiate at all, but now you're back at square one, you know? So you've either got to give up cash or you've got to go back to square one, or you got to get lucky and have a buyer who's already got that in place, right? So then I'll say that, and a lot of sellers will say, well, Joe, just find me a buyer who will promise to put up cash if it's short. 2, 3, 4 years ago when the market was hot, you had appraisal shortage coverage. That's what we called it, right? We don't even talk about that anymore. Where you would literally say if the appraisal falls short, because we were just assuming it would because so many homes were selling over market value, if the appraisal falls short, how much are you as a buyer going to cover of that? And that was a big part of whether or not we were going to take your offer. We're not seeing that a lot anymore because it's just we don't have as many multiple offer situations, certainly not in the 600,000 plus range. But those are some things to think about as a seller. So there you go. Hopefully you're not more confused, you're less confused. But if you've got any questions, or maybe you've got a scenario that you've actually dealt with, you've got some experience with this, we'd love to hear it in the comments. If you've got future video ideas for me, please share them in the comments or send me a private DM. But thanks for joining me as always. We're here every single Monday at 11:30, and we will see you next week. Take care.